Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're not familiar with the format of these sessions, and we get together every week on Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, and we're joined by folks really from all over the world. It's sort of an open session where people can join in and we can geek out about solar a little bit. But we break it into three parts. The first part, we'll do a little recap about what's happening in the news of the solar world. It's a good way to just keep abreast of what's going on in case you missed something. If you watch regularly, you'll find out you didn't miss something. And then what webinars, conferences are coming up that are pertaining to the industry of solar PV. And then we go into a deep dive about a topic of interest within the solar industry. And today we're going to talk about essentially the state of the industry. There are a number of reports that have come out about what's been happening in the first part of 2026, all of 2025. We're about a year into the Trump administration where there was a big shift in federal policy. So we're going to just discuss, okay, well, what's the state of the nation here when it comes to solar? So that's the topic du jour. And I'm talking to you from the NABCEP conference. We'll mention that one. NABCEP is the North American Board of Certified Energy Professionals. I think it's a very torturous acronym, but basically solar installers. And they're one of the two organizations that do solar certification here in North America. So let's go ahead and jump into the news from the solar world for the week of March 15th. And new solar power installations declined significantly in the state of Nevada last year as the Trump administration has been prioritizing fossil fuels over renewable energy. This, according to an industry report that was released last week. Nevada ranks 27th. I know this chart shows, but that's only three quarters of the year, shows them a little bit higher up. But they now rank 27th in the U.S. in solar installations last year, which is a dramatic fall from the ranking in the top 10 in 23 and 24, according to the report and data published by Solar Energy's Industries Association and Wood Mackenzie, an energy research firm. Despite the fall in new solar power installations, whoops, I just jumped out of the thing. The Nevada still ranks sixth in the nation in total solar capacity. Solar energy also maintained its position as the top source of new electric generation added to the grid in the U.S. Nevada has leaned heavily into solar in recent years, generating nearly 1/3 of its electricity from solar thanks to an abundance of sunshine and access to public lands within the state. Since 2016, Nevada's share of electric generation actually tripled. However, recent federal actions targeting clean energy could halt as many as 10 large solar and storage projects located primarily on federal lands, according to CEA. Those projects represent nearly 95% of all the planned new power within the state. Now, while Nevada is an extreme example of the recent decline in solar installations, due to federal policy headwinds. Nationwide, the industry did see a 14% decline in 2025 over solar generation capacity added in 2024. Energy experts suggest that the global average energy storage duration must increase from an average of around 2.5 hours to about 20 hours in order to maintain grid reliability while meeting growing load demand from renewable energy sources. So basically, when we talk about duration storage, most battery systems that are hooked up to the grid are really designed, as just said, to provide an average of 2.5 hours of power. Well, the thought process is we've got to expand that amount of capacity, and they're really targeting for about a 20-hour supply. So with this in mind, global long duration storage deployments rose 49% in 2025, exceeding 15 gigawatt hours, according to Wood Mackenzie's latest report. 93% of this long duration storage is actually installed in China. driven by strong national and provincial governmental support for these technologies capable of discharging power over longer periods of time. In fact, longer than 4 hours. That, I guess, is considered long duration storage. While most people think of energy storage in terms of batteries, compressed air storage actually made up about 45% of this storage capacity. Thermal storage, representing 33%, vanadium redox flow batteries, another 21% during 2025. Now, despite the impressive growth rate of long duration storage, it still only accounts for about 6% of the total energy storage on the grid. And currently, lithium ion battery projects, which average about 2 hours of storage capacity, while flow batteries and compressed air average around 4 hours, and thermal storage is up around 8 hours. The report does say that, though, due to falling prices and an abundant supply, lithium ion batteries will become more competitive in this market of long duration storage. Wood Mackenzie expects lithium ion batteries to hold at least an 85% share of the energy storage market through 2034, with flow batteries and compressed air capturing just 5% and 3%, respectively. And this week, the California Court of Appeals upheld Net Metering 3.0, or NEM 3.0, after months of reviewing it. Several solar industry and environmental groups filed a lawsuit with the California Public Utilities Commission regarding NEM 3.0 back in 2023 when it was implemented. And the California Supreme Court looked at it in 2024, and then in 2025 sent it back to the Court of Appeals to review it. So now that has been done, and for now, it looks like the program will remain intact and unchanged, according to the Court of Appeals. NEM 3.0 shifted net metering within California to an hourly time of use rate for compensating residential solar customers based on when exported energy was needed most on the grid. This change was made, the commission argued, to encourage more energy storage adoption at the residential level. However, what they really did is they cut the compensation for people net metering by 70 to 80% compared to their previous net metering programs. And as a result, the economics of installing solar within California was dramatically changed. Rooftop solar installations dropped by approximately 80%. This massive slowdown in demand resulted in the loss of about 17,000 jobs, approximately 22% of the state's residential workforce. And we're seeing a lot of that in discussion here at the NABCEP conference, where the solar installers, California just used to dominate when it came to solar installation, and that's just no longer the case. Virginia is about to become the second state to legalize balcony solar. We've talked about this a few times in recent shows here. 30 other states have similar bills moving through their various legislatures. The Virginia legislature passed the bill legalizing plug-in solar in a vote of 96-0. Sending it to Governor Spanberger, who is expected to sign it into law. This means Virginia residents will now be able to plug in solar devices up to 1,200 watts. So basically 3 solar panels connected in series. Utilities will not be allowed to charge fees of any sort for these systems. They will not be allowed to require prior approval to installation, but they will carry zero liability for these. So in other words, the customer will own them, customer will install them, and the customer will bear whatever liability happens. I guess the same could be said if you buy a washing machine. You're going to bear the responsibility. Utah was the first state to pass such a law to allow homeowners to plug in small PV systems directly into a 120-volt wall outlet. 30 more state legislatures, as I said, have introduced similar bills. The movement towards plug-in solar, which is quite popular throughout Europe, is taking hold with residential customers as they face rising utility rates due to extreme weather events. And of course, data center load demand is in the news quite a lot. Utilities in states considering this legislation are pushing back claiming that such systems as this are unreliable and unsafe. So we'll see how that goes. But that's the news that accumulated for me in the world of solar. Does anybody have anything, any other news they'd like to add to that? Anybody have anything at the moment? Always like, yep. Craig, you've got something?
Yes. Given those balcony solar panels, are there any nuances or phrasing regarding a person who DIYs their own, buy a couple panels, 400-watt panels, and, slap on inverters and, you know, attach a plug to it? I don't know if that
Yeah,
scenario is,
I think
works.
what you're going to find is most of the legislation is going to make um, some reference to it being UL certified, the system being UL certified, and there is
Okay.
a certification for these things. So a DIY system very likely would not meet that criteria. But that said, who's going to enforce it? I mean, it's one of those kind of things where most of these systems are so small that they will
Right.
never have any possibility. In fact, they're designed, if you do it properly, not to have the possibility of backfeeding the grid.
Right.
So,
Right.
and if you do incorporate batteries, typically you're plugging your appliance that you're going to be supplementing directly into the battery. So it's not like you're going to be backfeeding
Into
anything
the grid.
when the
Right.
grid goes down. When the grid goes down, the battery is just like sitting there. It's almost as if you just did a little solar generator and
Right.
plugged your
Exactly.
yeah. So I guess I would have no problem. Well, I've had no problem building my own little solar
Right.
generators and plugging
Exactly.
things in. I mean, we did a poor man's backup system at the farm where built a solar generator. I actually put in a couple of golf cart batteries, a big 400-watt inverter, an outlet. And if the power goes out, you just wheel it into the living room and plug stuff in, running
Exactly.
extension cords. So that's what can they say about that?
Okay.
Of course, they try to step foot on my farm. We're like in the hills we're the revenuers. The energy revenuers are coming. So we'll show them who's boss.
Exactly. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anybody else have
So
anything to add to that? Um,
Jay, it's my understanding that the plug-in solar is intended to be DIY friendly. Is that not what you expect it to be?
Yeah, it's intended to be homeowner installed, but I think they envision that you'll go down and buy a pre-engineered system that you'll just plug into the wall. So you'll go down to Home Depot or wherever these things are going to be sold, and you'll buy yourself a little unit, and it will have met this.
Okay.
But you could build your own system. We know, those of us on this call know that it's not that hard. But for most folks, it may be seemingly a little bit outside of their comfort zone to try and cobble something together. I think we talked
Okay.
about some of those other permitless systems before. Like you could do similar, and I think we're going to see similar things even without solar panels, where when the grid becomes less and less reliable, essentially installing battery backup on individual appliances throughout your home. Critical appliances like a system where you just plug a battery into the wall and plug your refrigerator into that battery. So you're creating a UPS for your refrigerator. I think we'll see more and more of those kind of systems that may or may not be connected to solar. Just because we're seeing a grid that in many parts of the country is less and less reliable. So, and I think we're going to see that accelerate.
So what Craig was referring to was what is the possibility of installing a system that may or may not be UL listed.
Right.
That's what he meant by the DIY system. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and what is that still permitted under those laws? My guess is technically it's not, only because I suspect they'll reference a UL listing that may or may not be there. But I do not see how they could possibly enforce such a thing, in any practical way. just doing that. I guess, who knows? I don't want to I dance around it a little bit. I know people are going to do it. That's one of those things. And I guess if you know what you're doing, it's like anything. If you know what you're doing, it's not going to be a problem. And if you don't know what you're doing, you'll burn your house down. So
Yeah, I have a non-UL listed EV charger,
yeah.
and it's served me well for the last 3 years, and it's great.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any other comments before we jump forward? All right. I'm going to go into the events, webinars, things of that nature. I'm juggling from a single screen, a silver screen. So if I lose something, I apologize. But as I said, I'm sitting here at the NABCEP conference at the moment. No, they're not playing music. So if you're not already here, you're probably not going to get here, but it's going on. This is one of the preeminent installation conferences. So hopefully maybe next week I'll have some insights. At the moment, I don't feel like I have any insights other than the coffee's all right. So that's good. All right. So March 17th, solar financing at 2 p.m. So that is today at 2 p.m. Eastern time. March 18th, Women Powering the Energy Transition. It's going to be 9 a.m. Eastern time. And all of these are, again, Eastern time, U.S. March 18th, Solarc products. There'll be one. Renview. These things are product specific, but they're usually pretty good. 1 p.m. there. March 18th, Supply Chain Outlook. This is coming from CEA. Oftentimes, theirs are more utility scale in focus than residential. Again, this is a bankable design. I looked at the description on this one on March 19th, and it really was kind of saying, okay, if you're going to design a big system, you better starting at the very beginning, think about the profitability of each step. What is the topology of the land? Things that are often overlooked that can throw in quite a lot of cost overruns as you're doing a system. This one looked kind of interesting to me. Solar United Neighbors often puts together some interesting webinars. March 23rd, they're basically saying what you should know about utility profits. My guess is they're gonna just talk about some of the. I was going to say they're going to make the utilities out to be the bad guys, which they probably should. So I'm sure that'll be interesting, worth a visit. Transmission planning, again, this is for the utility scale folks on the 24th. On the 25th, talks about supply chain issues for larger systems, sourcing, procurement. Sometimes it's even a problem with the smaller systems. March 26th, this is commercial and industrial battery systems at 2 p.m. The 30th, this is another product-specific one on Fronius and Renon systems, so 2 different panels and inverters. March 31st, the full ITC value strategy. This is a big deal, especially the bigger the project is. ITC is the investment tax credit. So that is still available for commercial, industrial, and utility scale systems. There are still, that's going to keep going on. There are a lot of provisions there. I think the one that they're really looking at is, I forget the acronym, but it's basically if you buy products that were sourced from China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran, that's going to get you into some trouble. So how do you determine if a nut or a bolt in a product was made in China, and China is really the one they're worried about, is that going to affect your ability to get tax credits? So, and then of course our programs, our classes that we offer, we do in person as well as hybrid courses and online training for residential, primarily residential installation and design. So those are the courses, the webinars. Again, I'll open it up to the group. Does anybody else have anything that they're interested in or that they have know that's coming up that I skipped over? Or I can open it up at this moment, and if you've got any questions, announcements, things of that nature that you'd like to share with the group, this is a good time before we get into the main thing. Before we jump into our discussion topic for today, if you're like us here at Solar PV Training and want to see world-class, affordable solar training in as many people's hands as possible, perhaps you teach at a community college or a trade school, or you're an installer trying to train some of your technicians, or just a person who's interested in solar, come visit us at solarpvtraining.com. I think we've got some good products for you. And also, just because you're interested in this topic, if you could like and subscribe to this particular channel, that would help us get the message out to as many people as possible. And that said, let's get on to our discussion topic. Feel free to jump in and interrupt me as we move forward if something occurs to you. And I would really like to make it a conversation as we move in. And of course, this is one that we all sort of have an opinion about, where we think the industry is going. So the thing that prompted this is that Energy Sage has every 6 months, they release a report, essentially what is the state of the industry. And they've been doing this for a dozen years or more. And it's interesting in and of itself, but it's also interesting to see how these things change over time. And so that's one of the values of this particular report. So that's part of what we're going to be doing here, is looking at some of their findings. But then I also got a couple of reports from CEA and Wood Mackenzie and those kind of guys, just to sort of flesh it out a little bit about where we're going in the state of the industry. And right off the bat, their solar report has been changed in title to now home electrification. So that should give you an indication that it's no longer residential solar, right? We're getting more into home electrification. So our buzzwords to diversify the industry. But I guess it makes sense. You're going from not only solar to batteries to EV chargers, and they're even getting into heat pumps and things of that nature within these reports. I skipped over the heat pump because I guess I'm just not interested in it. But anyway, so these sessions, as a reminder, have been awarded half an hour of CEUs for the ETA solar certification, or if you're electronic certifications. I don't know about fiber optic, but ETA will probably accept it as part of your continuing education for their certification. So just mentioned that. All right, as I mentioned, the report has a new name, but other than that, we'll go into some of the details that have been listed there. And of course, the first thing that everybody always asks me about with these is, what is the cost of installing solar? And this primarily focuses on residential solar. And the pricing per watt remains about the same. It's at $2.49 a watt is what their average is, according to Energy Sage. Last year and the year before, it was $2.48. So, that's a rounding error. It's really effectively unchanged. The big deal there is at the residential level. This year, we've lost the 30% tax credit. So the payback period, even though the prices remained unchanged, the payback period has gone from about 7 years to about 10 years, because 30% more cost. You're not getting that money back in the form of a tax credit. So that's the big change from pricing per se. And if you look at the trend over time, really all the way from the second half of 2014, this is the trend line for total installation costs. These are for grid-tied systems without batteries. I should mention that. If you add batteries to your system, it's going to be more. Plus, depending on where you live, the price is going to be different. So if you're thinking $2.50 a watt is expensive or cheap, based on where your experience where you are, it's because there is significant variation across the various states. But we can see that it's dropped down from close to $4 a watt, really 10 years ago, down to $2.50 a watt. So it gives you a sense of comparison there. We did see a slight bump after because of the supply chain disruption after COVID. So that was the reason for that little bump. I suspect it'll continue to go down. And I did want to compare this because we can all sit around patting ourselves on the back saying, "Oh, look, prices are going down. Isn't that wonderful?" But they're still super expensive compared to to me the baseline is Australia. And if you look at Australia in the cost per watt installation, I'll zoom in on that and then zoom back out. But you can see that the size has a big impact. So if you're putting in a 1.5 kW system, you're going to be paying about $2 a watt Australian for that system. But if you go up there and put in a 6 kW system, 6,000 watts, you're only paying about 70 cents or 80 cents Australian for that, which is cheap. I mean, if you look at it, a 6 kW system installed in Australia will cost you $3,800 US. So comparing that at the $2.50 or $2.49 per watt, we're looking at almost $15,000. Now, to my way of thinking, if I'm a homeowner and you come in and tell me that the cost of an installation is only $4,000, that's a pretty easy decision for me to make as far as installing solar. But if you tell me the cost is $15,000, that's a much harder decision to make. I might still opt for it, but you're eliminating a significant portion of the population.
Can I ask a
With
question?
Sure, go ahead.
Is that price for inverter kilowatts, battery kilowatts, or panel kilowatts?
I think those prices are panel kilowatts, DC. So it's going to be less, well, it's going to be more per watt for AC output from the inverter because there is a change there. But it is an apples to apples comparison between the US and Australia. And I guess one of the questions, and maybe somebody online has a better perspective on this, but I keep asking myself why? Why is Australia able to do this much cheaper than we're able to do it in the United States? And I think you're in Costa Rica right now, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is the install rate down there? I mean, because I know tariffs are one thing that impact the United States. When we start adding 100% to the cost of a battery and 150% to the cost of a panel, that's just a tax that our government has put on solar. You do not experience that, I assume. So you're right off the bat starting at 50% maybe cheaper for the equipment.
Yeah. And for instance, I do direct import. I still don't know how to pronounce them, but DIE inverters, DEYE, which is the same as SolarArc. And as soon as SolarArc puts its brand on it, it's 3 times as expensive. So there is apparently the belief in the market that U.S. Americans can pay more, and then they just charge more.
Aren't we the lucky ones? So
I guess so.
what is your retail price for a watt per panel, for panels themselves?
Last price I got from China, but this is ex-China, so then we have to bring them in, was 585 watt panel for $70.
So you're paying 12 cents more or less a watt for something like that?
Probably after importing, etc., depending on the size, it is 50% more, but still.
Yeah. And Taylor, what are you paying there in West Virginia retail? What is your actual cost per watt for solar panels, do you think? You're muted at the moment, Taylor.
Okay. We are right around 40 to 42 cents a watt. And that's for a panel that has a US, uh, label on it. So
Oh, so you can get the 10% tax credit for your commercial systems with that US manufacturer.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Devanand, I don't know if Devanand's on the call, but he lives in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's said previously he's paying about 12 or 10 cents per watt. So right there is a big difference.
Our price
Obviously,
used to be 10. Our price used to be 10 cents until a couple of weeks ago, but lithium has become very expensive very recently, or silicon. No,
oh, silicon, yeah.
Yes.
For the modules.
Prices flew up 20-30%.
Yeah. Well, and I know I've mentioned before in these sessions, the argument for the tariffs here in the United States is we must protect our domestic manufacturer against unfair trade practices by the Chinese primarily. I guess I would counter that argument with two things. One is we haven't for a number of years had a very robust domestic manufacturing market other than First Solar, which is not a silicon-based solar panel. That's a thin film for utility scale. So we're not really protecting them with these tariffs. And secondly, if the Chinese want to subsidize the cost of my solar installation, I think we should just let them. If they want to pay me to put solar panels on my roof, great, and if we want to compete, why don't we look at competing in the next generation of technologies? Because we're never going to out cheap the Chinese. So if we're trying to compete with the Chinese on price, we're just not going to. So, I think so. Those are my arguments, which is why I've never been elected to any office and never will be. So that's, but I'm happy to let them subsidize me, and they are subsidizing the rest of the world. So, have at it. Okay, so let me see if I jump back into my screen. And I did try and do a little bit of breakdown here. So why so cheap in Australia? Well, if you look at this, you guys are talking about the price of panels being 10 cents, whatever. Well, in this breakdown, the price of the panels came in at about 22 cents a watt. The thing that I found interesting is overall, soft costs were about 45% of the total install, hard costs about 55%. Now, obviously, 55% of a 70 to 80 cent per watt, the hardware cost is pretty cheap. Inspections and permits cost almost nothing there. So I guess the only takeaway I could find here was really, other than tariffs and other costs added on top of US, the big takeaway that I found is soft costs are 55% in the US, hard costs 45%. Australia, hard costs 55, 45. So we definitely back end load it with a bunch of things that are not hardware within the US, which adds to our costs. So I guess we've just heard that manufacturers are marking up prices for the US market because we have traditionally been willing to pay that. We have government policies that roll up the cost of our systems. And from my own personal experience, I've found that the permitting and various requirements at the local level can oftentimes add a significant amount to the cost of a solar installation, and it can get crazy. Some jurisdictions very little red tape, other jurisdictions a lot of red tape. Most of these nations, like Australia, in some parts of the US, it's getting there, where you can just simply go online, instantaneously get a permit, pay a small fee. It's kind of the way it should be, but we're not willing to get out of our way on that. Before I move on from the pricing, does anybody who's with the group have anything they want to add to that discussion from your experience, other reasons you might see why we're so expensive? And, we're moving in the right direction, but we have a long way to go. I mean, if we could get our pricing down to $1 a watt, I mean, who wouldn't install solar? That's kind of, I remember back in 2014 or 2012, back when I was doing teaching solar, the holy grail was getting the price of a panel down to $1 a watt wholesale. That was the thing where everybody said, if we can get the panel price down to $1 a watt, then we're going to start to see this market take off. And it really did. It did start to take off when it got to $1 a watt. Well, I'd say the next holy grail in all of this is to get the total install cost down to $1 a watt. And in order to do that, we have to turn this marketplace from a low volume, high margin industry, which it currently is here in the US, where effectively we're designing a car for every customer. We take the argument, hey, every driver is different, so we have to custom design a vehicle for every single driver. Well, how well would the automobile industry work if they did business that way? We have commonalities with these solar systems, and we need to come in with some way to essentially mass produce solar for homeowners, and how we're going to do that, that'll be your next billion-dollar business there. So I'll leave it up to one.
Maybe we can lean on AI to figure that out, because I don't know how it'll ever happen, but yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the ideas that I've got, and we're going to try and explore it this year. We just talked about doing a solar on a pole kind of situation where you take 6 panels or whatever on a pole, hook it into the utility disconnect, put some microinverters on it, not have any monitoring, not have any whatever. And you could do an end phase, 6 microinverters, 6 panels, take it to an AC disconnect and connect it straight into the utility disconnect at the meter. Never have to penetrate go into the house, never have to do anything on the roof. Every single home could support such a thing. It's like the next step up from balcony solar. It's a small system. If you want 2 of them, you could do 2 of them if you want, but do it in a way where the homeowner can do it themselves if they want to, or they can do it in integration with a designer or with a solar installer. The solar installer could do the whole job, or they could just send somebody there to hold their hand as Bubba and his buddies decide to install this thing, and you just have hopefully one adult in the room who knows what's going on saying, no, don't do that. Put down your beer and pay attention to what you're doing, that kind of thing. So we've got that kind of, maybe that's a way. And as part of the package, you have video instruction, you have permit ready drawings, you have vendor supply lists, all of those kind of things to just make this thing, easy for those homeowners who want to do it. So it's one step up. And I would think we could get it to $1 a watt, if they're doing the installation. So that's my idea. But yeah, go ahead.
Digging for the foundation for 6 panels on one pole, if they're, like a regular size bifacial, I believe you'd need about a 5-foot deep by probably 2-foot diameter hole.
Yeah.
Filled with concrete and rebar and such. Or at least I've done a 6-panel pole mount, for instance, and that's what was engineered for. And so, getting your regular homeowner to do that would be difficult. But certainly the contractor could come out and set the pole, and then the homeowner could take it from there. Yeah.
Or you could even do a 4-pole Iron Ridge type system where they literally could do it with exactly. A fence post digger. So all of those things could be modified, and yeah. So obviously there's some work, but yeah, I worry about that, having an auger get in there and dig that, and then of course you get into trenching and you get into all of those other things where the homeowner's probably going to cut right through, a sewer line or a gas line or something, I only say that because I have done those things myself. So I assume other people will do it too. So, I remember one time we were digging a hole, and it was literally out in the middle of the woods, putting in a little cabin. And all of a sudden I thought somebody broke my air compressor because I started hearing this. And it turned out they had just stuck a spud bar right through a buried gas line out in the middle of the woods. And that was a interesting experience. We vacated the place, called the gas people, and they meandered back out there. And the guy came out, and I walked with him, and he looked at the hole, and gas was spewing everywhere. And he kicked a few clods of dirt in over this gas thing. And he goes, "Yeah, we'll send somebody out to fix it." And I was like, "Isn't this dangerous?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, hell, it could blow the whole place up." It's like, "Well, you're being pretty casual about this." And I said, "Are we like liable for anything here?" And he goes, "I don't know. Did you do it on purpose?" I was like, "No." He goes, "Yeah, don't worry about it." So I was like, "Okay, I won't worry about it." But yeah, so things happen. But that one I would say wasn't our fault because the line wasn't marked. But or maybe it was marked, but it was hundreds of feet away. All right, so let me go ahead and jump into the states. States where, like I mentioned, these things are cheaper and more expensive in different states. I think that at the moment in the U.S., I was going to go by memory here, but I think it's is it Massachusetts maybe or no, Illinois. Illinois just became the most expensive state in the country on average for installing solar at $3.01 on average per watt. And I think the cheapest one there was Arizona, $2.02. So there's that's a significant variation between those two states. And why? I'm sure Arizona obviously has more sunlight, so you're going to get better return for a smaller investment. But okay, then I wanted to just highlight what solar panels are leading the market at the moment. And if you read it from the bottom up, you will see that REC was much more dominant, maybe with about a 40% market share, but that's dropped down to about a 20% market share. I don't know, maybe other people have a different perspective, but I always treat solar panels as kind of a generic commodity. As long as they're UL certified, really it's more a price per watt kind of thought process when you're selecting solar panels. Does anybody have a different perspective on that as far as, I guess warranty, customer service, but you almost don't interact with solar manufacturers that much. You're going to deal with the distributor for the most part. Anybody have a comment about solar panels? All right. Hearing none. Inverters. Inverters is a different matter. And where we see there's quite a mix of who's in the lead and that changes and all of that, and it's based on price with solar panels. Inverters, we still see this with a couple of players dominating. But the interesting trend that we've seen over the last 2 years or so is a few years ago, it was really a battle between Enphase and SolarEdge. And if we were to take this diagram back further, the roles would have been reversed. SolarEdge would have been the dominant player and Enphase the lesser player. Then by 2022 or so, Enphase becomes the most installed in the US inverter at the residential level, followed by SolarEdge, power optimizer systems, and then everybody else. Everybody else represented about 10% of the market. So if you could install SolarEdge, if you could install Enphase, you're pretty much dealing with the lion's share of what was out there. SolarEdge started having some reliability issues, and they did not handle that very well. They had a lot of their inverters breaking down, people having to replace them, and then having to go through a nightmare of customer service issues. Installers who were doing them as their primary go-to were tired of having to keep going out replacing product. So SolarEdge basically lost its reputation, and we see that declining. And Enphase was really the ones picking up that loss. They were the beneficiaries of it. Then sometime around 2024, we begin to see Tesla creeping in. And it was really with the advent of their Powerwall 3, the battery system, that then their inverter became a thing that people started installing. And and I think they install it because they're installing a Powerwall battery backup system. So anybody online here have experience with the Tesla product? I've got a lot of experience with the Enphase stuff, and I'm pretty comfortable with that, but I've never dealt with the Tesla. Any issues around there, or good product, bad product? Give you anybody? Taylor, I see you're talking, but you're not on.
I see people either love Tesla power, Tesla energy, or they hate Tesla energy. It seems like there's no middle ground.
Yeah.
There's folks that say it's an absolute nightmare and customer service is terrible, and then I hear installers that say we will not install anything else. I have personally not jumped into Tesla. I had made efforts to get certified, but then in the middle of that certification process, I decided it wasn't worth it because people had the whole Elon Trump thing happened, and then the market, you know, the customers just kind of shied away from it for a while, and so I decided not to get into doing Tesla because of the competitor products that were coming out were very competitive. In phase with their new 10C battery. If I was going to be installing a new system with battery backup, it would be a Solar. So,
Yeah.
Tesla kind of turned me away. They kind of turned their customers away, and therefore I shied away. So,
Well, and I've worked with Solarc, and I like those systems, but why do you like the Solarc system?
because the batteries they are agnostic. In the event of a end of the world situation, somebody could go buy a bunch of batteries and run them together in a 48-volt configuration, and they'd be up and running. But yeah, they don't lock you into a particular battery, so that is really great. It allows the battery market to be competitive, and the Solarc is just the inverter.
And they're also EMF hardened, right?
And
So talking about end of the world situation, you can survive that nuclear holocaust, right?
you can get them EMP hardened. They are
EMP,
also
yeah.
they're rated pretty highly for an EMP without the EMP hardening, or they're supposedly really good at withstanding a transient spike from the grid or lightning and things of that nature. They do test them for that just as a base model, but for the EMP hardening, that's a whole other set of components that are required. And even then, I believe the EMP hardening is a little bit of, I think it's kind of snake oil. So I don't try to push the EMP hardening myself. Because you just don't know if it's going to be effective.
Right. And you probably got other things to worry about if there is a nuclear attack. Well,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and they supposedly have very good customer service. I've never had to deal with them. Enphase, I will say, my experience has always been positive. They have really good customer service. And the other thing you mentioned, as far as with Tesla getting certified by them, most of these manufacturers have their own certification process that they typically will want you to go through, or require you to go through in order to commission their systems. So if you're out there thinking about doing this, and this probably locks people into a specific product as well, because once you're certified by Enphase, but you're not certified by, say, SolarEdge, why would you install a SolarEdge system? You're just going to stick with the thing that you know and deal with that. So, Al, you had a question there?
Yeah, I thought I'd just share my experience. I installed in 2019 with an LG battery and a SolarEdge inverter, both of which failed within about 3 years. The new SolarEdge inverter that I got, I guess it's only been a couple years ago now. Again, the customer service was terrible, both for me and for the installer, but the new inverter seems to be a much improved product. We've had several power outages, and the new battery and inverter have worked really well.
Okay. I know it's funny how these companies get reputations, and the old thing about a reputation takes you years to establish it and a week to lose it. and Enphase used to have a bad reputation with their M215s. Their M215s failed all the time, and that's several generations ago of their microinverters. Then their M250s seem to be a little bit better, but once you get into the IQ6s, IQ7s, IQ8s, I've really heard almost no problems with those. I mean, I haven't personally experienced a problem with those models, but you still hear installers saying, "Yeah, I don't like Enphase because their inverters are always crapping out on you." And it's like, okay, well, that's 10 years old information that you're dealing with there. Their product has changed, but try and convince somebody of that because they've moved on. So, all right, well, let me jump ahead here. Okay, so really we're seeing a battle between Tesla and Enphase. Working on other people's installs, I found this interesting if you're a solar installer. Basically, a lot of people don't want to, but they are. They're dealing with other people's mistakes. Some of this is the fact that this is still a young industry and businesses come and go. So about 92% of these installers were saying they work on other people's they do corrections, corrective repairs, removal and reinstallation. I hear a lot of that. Somebody is moving or has to have their roof fixed or whatever. Just doing inspections, battery maintenance. There's no such thing as a maintenance-free battery. No such thing as a maintenance-free anything, really. Warranty support. Preventive maintenance, I don't know about that. Monitoring, those would be larger systems. Most common issues, lack of documentation, unknown equipment. We run into that a lot. They don't like doing it because they're not going to make much money on it. So interesting to see the perspective of the installers there. Battery prices, we're seeing that there's a gentle uptick in battery prices. I think we can blame our good elected officials for a lot of that. We're really talking about tariffs, bumping up the cost of lithium ion. And of course, China remains the main source of these materials. And when you decide to put a 50% or 100% tariff on these products, you're going to see an increase in the cost there. The number one battery manufacturer is really Tesla. Number two is Enphase. Well, it makes sense. These are the number one and number two systems that are now currently being installed in residential. So really in the battery world at the moment, it seems to be a battle between Franklin, Enphase, and Tesla. I mean, right there, you're talking about 95% of the industry. And then probably Taylor is taking care of the other 5% because he's putting in these solar systems that are non-proprietary. Although you could probably put in a Franklin. Okay, the batteries, state by state. Well, one of the things is that I found interesting is really that we've seen batteries. Last year, it was about 41% of all systems were installing batteries. Now it's about 39, 38%. So we're seeing a slight decline there. And I think it's just a matter of price. And I suspect that the economy in many places is going down a bit. So battery backup, unless your grid is very unreliable, it's kind of it's a luxury purchase. So, and Tesla, definitely number one. Franklin getting into some of these places. Least expensive, really, EG4.
Jay,
Yeah.
this is another. Could you go back to? I can't believe the previous slide. So can you go back to it?
Here?
Yeah, these prices per kilowatt hour are so intensely insane. We have 5 or 10 kilowatt hours for like what is it, $800, $1,000? This is absurd. Something is wrong in the market.
Yeah.
It's nice that people buy Tesla, but they're overpaying.
They are for sure. Yep, I agree, and I hear that from folks like yourself in Costa Rica or other countries, and it's really shameful. I mean, we're paying 5, 10 times as much for the same product, essentially. These are, so, but unfortunately, those are real numbers. That's the issue that we're dealing with. And we need to, and it is, some of it is just how the marketplace has been established. People are finding that they're willing to pay that number. But also it's I think we have 100% tariff on batteries, so right there, the cost is going to be at least double. And when you look at why people are installing batteries, it really is kind of split between grid backup, which I found interesting that is the least stated reason for having batteries installed, that it's like a UPS in case the grid goes down. Self-supply is another one. So if the utility is giving you a crappy deal on net metering, why are you selling it to them for 5 cents and then buying back power for 25 cents? Why not just use all the power you're generating, self-consume it? And then the other is basically time of day pricing. So you'll use your battery when electricity is expensive during peak load demand, and you'll refill it either from the grid or from your system when electricity is inexpensive. Financing, I threw this one in here too. People are paying about 7.5% if they finance it, and getting about a 25-year loan on that. I was surprised. It never really occurs to me about financing, but 58% finance these systems. So, clearly that adds significantly to the overall cost. And then EV charging. This is now becoming a thing with solar installers. You're starting to see more and more folks install EV chargers as part of their core business. And which ones are they installing most? Well, Tesla. Tesla is ChargePoint. I've never heard of Emporia, but I probably should have. I have heard of ChargePoint and Wallbox. These are some of those. And as we've talked about in previous sessions, I think bidirectional charging will be a thing, but at least for the time being, other than the Enphase system, which is purported to come out in the last quarter of this year, all of these things are, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them are going to be proprietary in nature, a bidirectional charger for a specific model of a specific electric vehicle. It's similarly to the Ford Lightning thing. And then the CEA, this is the Solar Energies. I just found this curious here, interesting to see the trend line. And I guess the one thing that I wanted to point out from this particular graph is we're hearing a lot in news and politics about the resurgence of natural gas as compared with solar. But if you look at 2025, yes, the amount of natural gas new generating capacity doubled. And that would be a headline, new generation from natural gas doubles in 2025 over 2024. But it doubled from 4% to 8%, which is still half of what it was in 2023. So, the headline that should read is over 90% of new generating capacity comes from, basically renewable energy, wind, solar, and storage. And storage, of course, is the big news in all of that. I mean, almost 80% is coming from solar and storage. So that's really the takeaway. These I found interesting when they're projecting the market. I looked at this graph and it says, okay, 2024 banner year, things are dropping off in 2025, and then it's going to hit kind of almost a steady state as far as new solar installations. And the thing I took away from this slide, this is coming from all the experts at Wood Mackenzie and CEA. I thought the only thing I can tell from this is it's got to be wrong. It's going to be wrong. I mean, things don't just progress, especially in the world we live in now, in a steady state situation. We're in the solar coaster, as they like to say, up and down and up and down. And I think we're going to see significant disruptions and then significant overbuild. So we may end up at the same point at the end of this, but I think it's going to be much more chaotic. And the same thing when you look at residential. They're basically saying, okay, we're going to see a little bit of growth, and it's going to be the same. And mark my words, that's just going to be wrong too. Projections are what they make of it. And I found this slide interesting. I'm kind of rushing through because we're running out of time. But remember the one from the report from I just lost it, but the one we just looked at said that $2.49 a watt is the average residential price in 2025. The Energy Sage report. And then CEA comes out and says the average residential is $3.39, So, who's right, who's wrong? I don't know. But the takeaway here that I found interesting is if you look at the comparison between residential, commercial, and utility. So utility fixed is just at about $1.18 a watt, up a little bit from the year before, where it was $1.07. But utility scale is down, it costs, and this is fully all installed. I think that's about where residential should be. So that's where we've got to go. But when the utility is installing a solar system, they're only paying a little more than $1 a watt. So their payback is pretty quick. And installations by state, we're seeing that Texas is number one, California, Indiana. Indiana shot right up there to number 3, all the way 15th, 10th, and Florida, Arizona. And what's interesting is I think, at least interesting to me, and maybe it's because where I live, but in the top 7, you've got Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. I mean, these are not exactly states. Arkansas, number 9, or in the top 10, you've got these 4 states there that you would not anticipate would be big solar. And I think most of that has to do with the PJM territory and the fact that the data centers are being built out in these regions, and we're seeing a lot of utility scale solar in that location. And I suspect that's going to continue for a bit. Okay, anybody have any real quick comment before we call it a day here? Give somebody the last word. Yeah, Craig.
Hey, so right now we got SB 294 that's out there to ban solar.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's out. So we're on the what, top 9?
Yeah, Ohio's like number 6 or 7 there. Yeah. Yeah, I was having
it's an astonishing assault on an industry. I just can't believe that they would try to stop it for a couple of years.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And I know you've been working with talking to some of the Ohio legislators. And basically what Tim is bringing up is legislation that's facing not only in Ohio, but some other states where it's a roundabout way. They're pretending to be doing something other than their real motivation is just simply to halt all utility scale wind and solar. And it's an assault. And I think the thing, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the legislators do not understand this enough to get incensed about it. Those who are there, is that your impression, is the people who would normally defend it are just kind of like, I don't even know what they're talking about.
They're clueless of it, and they didn't even write the bill. This came from ALEC, American Executive Exchange. Anyway, it's a template bill, and it's going across states. It did pass in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and Missouri. Yep.
And Missouri. Yeah.
Yep. And really the only places that it runs a risk of passing are those states with Republican governors, because it has gotten through some other legislators, but the Democratic governors have vetoed. So Ohio, it's at risk of passing, which you wouldn't think, because actually when you look at where is the major concentration of data centers that are being built, the number 1 in the world is Northern Virginia, and number 2 in the world is Columbus, Ohio area. So you would think an industry that is that massive would come in and try and defend, an assault on their livelihood. And so maybe this is just coming up because it just reminds me a little bit back when Microsoft was being sued as a monopoly because of their browser and all of that, and the Explorer was going to take over the world, and all of a sudden Microsoft started giving out like $600 million in campaign contributions, and the whole problem went away. So maybe this is just an attempt to extort money from an industry that has not been paying to play, and I suspect that's what we have to do.
I see that.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're over our time a little bit. I appreciate your attendance, and we'll see you guys next week. All right. Take care.